My hands are still vibrating. That's the first thing I notice. The aluminum bat is humming in my grip like a tuning fork, stinging my palms. But I can't drop it. I can't move. I can't breathe. Because the man on my floor isn't a thief. Thieves don't wear suits that cost more than my entire cabin. Thieves don't smell like storm clouds and expensive whiskey. And thieves definitely don't take a 90-mile-per-hour swing to the temple and just sit there. He should be unconscious. He should be dead. Instead, the intruder is on his knees, blood tracking a hot, dark line down a jaw that looks carved from granite. He blinks once, twice. The gold in his eyes isn't just a color. It's a biological warning sign. Radioactive. I grip the bat tighter, my knuckles turning white. I'm calling the police, I squeak. I have a landline. It works sometimes. He ignores me. He ignores the blood. He ignores the weapon raised over his head. He leans forward, inhaling sharply, his nostrils flaring wide. The sound is wet, animalistic, and terrifyingly deep in his chest. Vanilla, he rasps. His voice sounds like gravel grinding together. What? He drags himself forward, 1 inch, then 2. He's not attacking. He's crawling to me. You smell, he groans, his eyes rolling back in his head as he presses his forehead against my bare shin, like the only quiet thing in the world. Then the Alpha King wraps his arms around my legs, exhales a breath that shudders through his entire massive frame, and rubs his cheek against my knee like a 200-pound cat. Don't move, he commands, his voice slurring into a dark, delirious purr. If you move, I'll have to hunt you. And I'm too tired to run anymore. I look at the bat. I look at the king drooling on my socks. And I realize, with a sinking horror, I'm not the one holding the weapon here. Okay, pause. Breathe. Are you seeing this? Because I am looking at my screen, and I am sweating. Welcome back to Storm's Werewolf Romance Library. If your heart just skipped a beat, or 3, you are exactly where you belong. We don't do boring here. We do possessive, unhinged, and absolutely addictive. I need a favor from my pack right now. Check your pulse, then check that subscribe button. If it's red, fix it. We need you in the ranks. And for those of you who want the uncut, extended versions where the tension gets even thicker, hit that join button and become a channel member. Right now, I need you to go to the comments and tell me, if the Alpha King passed out on your rug, do you call the ambulance? Or do you lock the door? Be honest, I'm reading every single one. Now, let's see what happens when he wakes up. Chapter 1. The Aluminum Treason. The aluminum bat was still humming in my grip, a violent vibration that traveled all the way up to my shoulders and settled as a dull ache in my teeth. Outside, the storm was tearing the world apart, but inside my small, drafty cabin, the silence was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating quiet that usually precedes a scream. I stared down at the man sprawled across my cheap woven rug, my chest heaving like I'd just run a marathon. He was face down, motionless, and massive. Even in the heap of limbs and soaked dark clothing, he looked less like a person and more like a boulder that had decided to crash through my living room window. Rain lashed against the broken glass, soaking the floorboards, but I couldn't move to cover the opening. I couldn't do anything but grip the handle of my Louisville Slugger and pray that I hadn't just become a murderer. A low groan rumbled from the floor, a sound so deep it felt like the house foundations were shifting. He wasn't dead. My relief was instantly replaced by a wave of cold, sharp terror. Because if he wasn't dead, that meant he was going to be very, very angry. I took a shaky step back, raising the bat again, though my arms felt like jelly. The intruder shifted, rolling onto his back with a fluidity that shouldn't have been possible for a man of his size, especially one who had just taken a 90-mile-per-hour swing to the temple. He brought a large hand up to his head, wincing as he touched the spot where skin had split. But then he froze. His hand dropped, His eyes snapped open, and the breath left my lungs in a painful whoosh. They weren't human eyes. They were gold, molten, terrifying, predatory gold that glowed in the dim light of the cabin. I knew those eyes. Every shifter from the coastline to the mountains knew those eyes. They belonged on billboards, on news feeds, and in the nightmares of anyone foolish enough to cross pack law. I hadn't just clubbed a burglar. I had assaulted Rian, the Alpha King, the ruler of all packs, the apex predator of our entire species. I dropped the bat. It clattered to the floor with a deafening noise. But I didn't hear it over the rushing blood in my ears. I backed away until my legs hit the edge of my coffee table, my mind racing through escape routes that didn't exist. There was nowhere to run. I was a solitary omega living on the fringe of society, and I had just committed high treason with sports equipment. "Please don't kill me," I whispered, the words tumbling out in a rush of panic. "I thought you were a thief. You broke the window. I didn't know it was you. I'll pay for the glass. I'll turn myself in." Rian didn't speak. He didn't even look angry. He blinked slowly, his pupils dilating until the gold was nearly swallowed by black, giving him a look that was less monarch and more concussed animal. He sat up, swaying slightly like a drunkard, rainwater dripping from his dark hair onto his nose. He looked at the bat, then at me, and then he did the last thing I expected. He smiled. It was a lopsided, devastatingly handsome expression that stripped years off his face, transforming the terrifying king into something surprisingly boyish. "Hi," he rumbled, his voice sounding like gravel wrapped in velvet. He scrambled forward on his hands and knees, moving with a desperate, clumsy urgency that frightened me more than an attack would have. Before I could scramble over the sofa to get away, he closed the distance. He didn't strike me. He didn't grab my throat. He wrapped his massive arms around my waist and buried his face in the soft cotton of my oversized t-shirt, inhaling deeply. The heat radiating off him was intense, soaking through my clothes instantly. I stood there, paralyzed, and my hands hovering uselessly in the air as the most dangerous creature on Earth hugged my midsection like a giant muscle-bound koala. "Found you," he mumbled against my stomach, his voice thick with something that sounded painfully like relief. "Smell like vanilla and rain." Finally, the sheer weight of him was anchoring me to the spot, his forehead resting heavily against my ribs. My wolf, usually a timid and dormant thing, suddenly woke up in my chest, pacing and purring, urging me to touch him, to soothe the angry bruise forming on his temple. I fought the instinct, terrified that this was a trick, a trap, or a hallucination brought on by stress. "Your Majesty?" I squeaked, trying to pry his arms loose, but it was like trying to bend steel bars. "You have a head injury. You need a doctor. You need to let go." He ignored me completely, I tightening his grip until I gasped. He shifted, turning his head so his cheek rested against my hip, his eyes fluttering shut. He looked exhausted, the lines of strain around his mouth smoothing out as he breathed me in. "Not going anywhere," he slurred, his words blurring together as the concussion and exhaustion took hold. Soft. Quiet. Mine. The word hung in the damp air between us, heavy and absolute. It wasn't a question. It was a claim. A shiver raced down my spine, equal parts fear and an electric thrill I couldn't suppress. He wasn't arresting me. He was claiming me. "Sleep now," he whispered, his heavy body sagging against my legs, dead weight threatening to pull me down with him. "Don't leave, Maya. If you leave, I'll have to burn the world down to find you again." Chapter 2. Concussion Protocol. Moving a 250-pound Alpha King while trying not to hyperventilate is not a graceful process, and it certainly wasn't the romantic rescue scene you see in movies. It involved a lot of undignified shoving, grunting, and apologizing to his unconscious form every time his heavy boots knocked against my grandmother's antique coffee table. By the time I finally managed to leverage Rian onto my lumpy floral print sofa, I was sweating, and the knees of my pajama pants were covered in dust. He took up the entire piece of furniture, his legs hanging off the armrest, and his broad shoulders practically swallowing the cushions, making my cozy living room feel suddenly like a dollhouse that had been invaded by a giant. I stood over him for a moment, hands on my hips, I staring at the sheer masculine size of him and wondering if I should just pack a bag and flee to a non-extradition country while he was still out cold. But I couldn't leave him. My wolf, usually a quiet and pragmatic creature, was currently pacing circles in my chest, whining at the sight of the blood drying on his temple. Sighing, I fetched a bowl of warm water and a clean cloth, kneeling beside the sofa with a trepidation that made my hands shake. Up close, without the terrifying golden glare, he was devastatingly beautiful, in a rugged, carved-from-granite sort of way. I gently dabbed at the cut on his forehead, flinching when he groaned low in his throat, a rumble that vibrated through the floorboards and straight into my knees. His skin was burning hot, a feverish heat that radiated off him in waves. And as I leaned in to clean the wound, I caught that scent again. Spiced amber, rain-soaked earth, and raw, potent power. It was intoxicating, pulling at instincts I had buried years ago to survive on my own. Suddenly, a large hand shot out and clamped around my wrist, halting my movements instantly. I gasped, water sloshing from the bowl onto the rug. But he didn't let go. His grip wasn't painful, but it was absolute. An iron shackle that tethered me to him. Ryan's eyes cracked open, unfocused and hazy, trying to find me in the dim light. There was no recognition of his rank or my treason in his gaze, only a raw, stripped-down intensity that felt far more dangerous than his anger. He blinked slowly, his lashes casting long shadows on his cheeks, and then tugged my hand toward his face. Rubbing his cheek against my palm, like a touch-starved animal seeking comfort. "Not a dream," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep and pain. "You're still here. You didn't run." I tried to pull my hand back, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. But he only tightened his hold, lacing his fingers through mine. "I can't run, Your Majesty," I whispered, my voice trembling. "You're holding me hostage in my own living room." A slow, lazy smirk spread across his lips, and he opened his eyes fully, the gold swirling with a chaotic mix of amusement and something darker, hungrier. "Good," he rasped. "Stay. You smell like fear. Too much cortisol. It tastes bitter." Before I could process the absurdity of the Alpha King critiquing the flavor of my panic, he tugged hard on my hand, pulling me off balance until my chest bumped against his solid, unyielding chest. "Scent me," he ordered, the command dropping an octave into a growl that wasn't aggressive, but undeniably compelling. "Cover the fear. Mark me so you know I'm not a threat." My eyes widened. Scenting was intimate, something reserved for pack mates and mates, a way to mingle pheromones to create a sense of safety and belonging. "I can't do that," I stammered, staring at the pulse beating steadily in his strong neck. "You're the king. I'm a rogue. If I scent you, your guards will think I'm trying to claim you." "I don't care about guards," he grumbled, impatient now, shifting his hips to make room for me on the narrow edge of the sofa. "I care that you're shaking. Fix it." He didn't wait for my permission. With a groan of effort, he wrapped his other arm around my waist and hauled me completely off the floor, depositing me on top of him. I squeaked in shock, finding myself straddling the most powerful male in existence, my knees bracketed by his thighs. He smelled overwhelming this close. A rich, dark sensory overload that made my head spin. He buried his face in the crook of my neck, inhaling sharply, and the tension in his body instantly began to bleed away. "Better," He breathed against my skin, the vibration sending shivers down my spine. "Now you." Hesitantly, knowing I had no other choice if I wanted to calm him down, I lowered my head. I pressed my nose against the junction of his neck and shoulder, inhaling the complex, earthy scent of him. It was instant magic. The fear that had been gripping my throat loosened, replaced by a heavy warmth that settled in my belly. My wolf sighed, curling up in satisfaction. We stayed like that for a long moment, the storm raging outside while a different kind of storm brewed in my living room. I felt his hand slide up my spine, tangling in my hair, holding me close as his breathing evened out. "See?" he whispered, his lips brushing the sensitive skin below my ear. "Safe. I'd tear the world apart before I let anything hurt you." I pulled back slightly to look at him, breathless and flushed. "You're concussed, Rian. You don't know what you're saying." His golden eyes locked onto mine, lucid and terrifyingly serious. "I know exactly what I'm saying," he countered softly. Then he shifted, pulling me down until I was lying fully atop him, my ear pressed over his heart. He wrapped his legs around mine, unlocking me into a cage of muscle and heat. "Sleep," he commanded, closing his eyes again. "And stop that heart of yours from racing, Maya, or I'll have to lick it calm myself." Chapter 3. The Monster in My Living Room. Morning sunlight has a cruel way of exposing reality, and the reality of my situation was currently standing in my kitchen, wearing nothing but a pair of borrowed sweatpants that were straining at the seams and looking utterly ridiculous. I had woken up alone on the sofa, curled into a ball of warmth that smelled distinctly of expensive musk and pine, only to find the Alpha King waging a silent war against my household appliances. Rian was simply too big for my cabin. The ceiling beams, which had always felt cozy and rustic, now looked like a hazard for his forehead. And he had to stoop slightly just to avoid giving himself a second concussion. He was holding my favorite ceramic mug, the one with the hand-painted sunflowers, with a delicacy that terrified me, his massive fingers nearly engulfing the entire cup. I watched from the doorway, sleep still clinging to my eyes, as he tried to maneuver around my tiny island counter without knocking over the fruit bowl. It was like watching a grizzly bear try to host a tea party. He turned, his shoulder brushing against the spice rack, and the mug in his hand gave a sharp, mournful crack. The handle snapped off, leaving him holding the ceramic loop while the cup remained on the counter. He stared at it, his expression a mix of confusion and genuine offense, as if the mug had personally insulted his strength. "It was weak," he muttered, tossing the handle into the trash with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "I'll buy you a new one. I'll buy you a kiln. You can make 1,000 of them." I couldn't help the hysterical bubble of laughter that escaped my throat, drawing his golden gaze instantly. The playfulness in his eyes from last night was gone, replaced by a clarity that made my breath hitch. The concussion haze had lifted, leaving behind the sharp, calculating intelligence of a ruler who wasn't used to hearing the word no, let alone breaking dishware in a rogue's kitchen. "You're awake," I said, pulling my robe tighter around myself as if terry cloth could protect me from the sheer gravitational pull of him. "And you're destroying my property again. First the window, now the mug. Are you planning on dismantling the rest of the house before breakfast?" Rian leaned back against the counter, the wood creaking in protest under his weight, and crossed his arms over his bare chest. The movement highlighted the terrifying expanse of muscle and the jagged silver scars that mapped his skin. Souvenirs from wars I had only read about in history books. "The house is too small," he stated flatly, as if it were a structural defect he intended to rectify immediately. "And the toaster growled at me. I unplugged it." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "It pops up, Rian. It doesn't growl. Look, the storm has passed. You seem lucid. I need to go out and check the perimeter. My wards might have been damaged when you decided to use my living room as a landing strip." It was a lie, of course. My wards were fine. I just needed 5 minutes of fresh air to remember how to breathe without his scent clogging my lungs. I moved toward the heavy oak front door, my hand reaching for the iron latch, desperate for the biting cold of the morning to clear my head. I never touched the metal. One moment, Rian was leaning against the kitchen counter 10 feet away, and the next, a heavy slam shook the entire cabin as his hand planted itself flat against the wood beside my head. He moved faster than thought, a blur of motion that ended with him caging me against the door, his body a wall of heat pressing into my front. I gasped, looking up, way up, into eyes that were no longer soft with sleep. They were burning with a possessive, terrifying intensity that pinned me in place more effectively than his arm. He wasn't the clumsy, concussed stray anymore. He was the king, and I had just tried to leave his territory. "You aren't going outside," he growled, his voice vibrating through my chest. He lowered his head until his nose brushed against my jaw, inhaling that deep, shuddering breath that made my knees weak. "There are people looking for me, Maya. Bad people. And if you step out that door, you lead them right to us." I tried to flatten myself against the wood, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "You crashed here by accident," I whispered, trying to find my voice. "Once you leave, they'll leave me alone. I'm just a nobody living in the woods." Rian let out a dark, humorless laugh that sent a chill skittering down my spine. He pulled back just enough to look me in the eye, his thumb tracing the line of my lower lip with a reverence that felt like a brand. "You think this was an accident?" he asked softly, the danger in his voice wrapping around us like smoke. "You think I just happened to stumble into the one house in 1,000 miles that smelled like salvation?" He leaned in closer, his gaze dropping to my mouth, hungry and unyielding. "I didn't crash, Maya. I wasn't running aimlessly in the storm. I was tracking a scent that has been haunting my dreams for 10 years. I didn't fall into your living room. I landed." Chapter 4. Breakfast with a Predator. Eating instant oatmeal while the most powerful shifter in existence watches you with unblinking predatory focus is an experience that should come with a hazard warning. Rian sat across from me at the small, rickety kitchen table, his massive frame dwarfing the wooden chair until it groaned in protest under his weight. He wasn't eating. He had pushed his own bowl aside after one sniff, declaring it sludge, and had instead devoted his entire attention to watching me bring a spoon to my mouth. It was unnerving. Every time I swallowed, his gaze dropped to my throat, tracking the movement with a hunger that had absolutely nothing to do with food, and everything to do with the fact that he was currently sitting in my kitchen, wearing my ex-boyfriend's old sweatpants, looking like a displaced deity of war, trying to figure out domesticity. "You're staring," I muttered, setting my spoon down with a clatter because my hand was trembling too much to hold it steady. "Is there something on my face, or are you just trying to intimidate the strawberries into surrendering?" Rian didn't blink, didn't smile, didn't even pretend to be embarrassed. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, invading my personal space with that effortless, terrifying grace of his. His gold eyes were clearer now, less hazy than the night before, but the intensity hadn't dialed back. If anything, it had sharpened into a laser focus that made my skin prickle. "I'm listening," he said simply, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the wood of the table and into my bones. "To the quiet." I frowned, looking around the cabin. The storm outside had died down to a steady drizzle, tapping rhythmically against the roof, and the refrigerator was humming its usual off-key tune. It wasn't exactly silent. "It's not that quiet," I argued, gesturing vaguely with my spoon. "The fridge is noisy, the floorboards creak, and I'm pretty sure there's a squirrel nesting in the chimney." Rian shook his head, a dark lock of hair falling over his forehead, softening the harsh lines of his face. He reached out, his large, rough hand covering mine on the table, his thumb sweeping over my knuckles in a soothing rhythm. "Not that kind of noise, Maya. The pack. The voices." He tapped his temple with his free hand, his expression tightening with a flash of phantom pain. Thousands of them, always, demanding, pleading, angry, fearful. It never stops. It's a roar that drowns out everything else. I haven't heard silence in 10 years. He looked at me then, really looked at me, with a vulnerability that stole the breath from my lungs. Until you. When I'm near you, the roar stops. It's just peace. My heart gave a painful squeeze. I knew about the alpha burden, the mental link to the pack, but I had never considered what it would be like to be the king, linked to millions. To never have a moment of solitude inside your own head. Is that why you chased me? I whispered, the realization settling heavy in my chest. Because I'm a mute button? He squeezed my hand, his grip bordering on painful in its desperation. No, because you're the anchor. You don't just silence the noise, you replace it with something better. He lifted my hand, pressing his lips to my palm, his eyes slipping shut as he inhaled. Don't make me go back to the noise yet. Please. Before I could answer, before I could process the terrifying intimacy of the king of shifters begging me for sanctuary, a loud crack echoed from outside, followed by the definitive thrum pop of the transformer down the road blowing out. The cabin plunged into instant, pitch blackness. I gasped, freezing in my chair, but Rian didn't flinch. Across the table, 2 glowing gold irises burned in the dark, illuminating the sharp planes of his face like a demon in a Renaissance painting. He stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor, and moved around the table until he was standing directly behind me, his hands settling heavy and possessive on my shoulders. They're searching the grid, he murmured into my ear, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper that sent shivers racing down my spine. If they find a power surge, they'll check the source. They'll take me back to the noise, Maya. They'll lock me in the tower and bury me in paperwork and politics. He leaned down, wrapping his arms around me from behind, pulling me back against his solid chest. Ma turning himself into a human shield against the encroaching reality. Hide me, the king begged, burying his face in my neck. Don't let them take me. Chapter 5. The fever break. The power outage wasn't just an inconvenience. It was the catalyst for a nightmare. Without the hum of the heater, the cabin grew cold rapidly, but Rian was burning up. The concussion, combined with the stress of whatever he had been running from, had triggered a violent, rapid-onset healing fever. By noon, the imperious, terrifying alpha was shivering uncontrollably on my sofa, his skin radiating heat like a furnace. I had piled every blanket I owned on top of him, but he kicked them off, groaning in delirium, thrashing against cushions that were far too small to contain him. "Rian, stop moving!" I ordered, and my voice sharper than I felt as I knelt beside him with a basin of cold water. "You're going to reopen the wound on your head." He didn't answer, just mumbled something incoherent about ice and walls. I had to strip him. It wasn't a sexual choice, it was a medical necessity, but as I peeled the damp, sweat-soaked t-shirt off his body, my mouth went dry. He was a landscape of violence. Thick, jagged scars crisscrossed his torso, silver lines mapping battles and assassination attempts that I couldn't even imagine. His chest heaved with shallow breaths, the muscles jumping under his skin as if he were fighting an invisible enemy in his sleep. I dipped the cloth into the icy water and wrung it out, laying it across his broad chest. He hissed at the contact, his back arching off the sofa, his hand shooting out blindly to grip my wrist. Don't," he rasped, his eyes flying open. They were glassy, the gold clouded with fever. "Don't touch the scars. Ugly." The raw shame in his voice broke my heart. Here was a creature built for war, ashamed of the evidence of his survival. "They aren't ugly," I whispered, using my free hand to gently stroke the hair back from his damp forehead. "They're history. They mean you won." He slumped back, his grip on my wrist softening but not letting go. He pulled my hand to his mouth, pressing a fever-hot kiss to my pulse point. "Winning is lonely," he murmured, the words slurring together. "Everyone wants the king. Everyone wants the power, the protection, the favor. No one wants Rian. No one asks Rian if he's tired." He looked at me with a devastating, childlike openness that stripped away all his armor. "Are you going to ask me for a favor? I am Maya. Do you want a territory? A title? Money?" "I want you to shut up and lower your body temperature," I said softly, leaning down to replace the cooling cloth on his forehead. "I don't want a title, Rian. I just want you to be okay." He stared at me for a long, unblinking moment, as if trying to decipher a foreign language. Then, slowly, a tear leaked from the corner of his eye, tracking through the sweat on his temple. "Okay," he whispered. "Just Rian. I can be Rian." I couldn't help myself. The vulnerability was a gravitational pull I couldn't resist. I leaned down and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to the center of his forehead, right next to the healing cut. He sighed, a long, broken sound, and finally, his body went lax, surrendering to the sleep he so desperately needed. I stayed there on the floor, holding his hand, watching the rise and fall of his chest, wondering how I was ever going to let him go when the world came knocking. And then, the world knocked. Or rather, it chopped. A low, rhythmic thumping sound started in the distance, growing louder with every second until it vibrated the glass in the window frames. Thwump, thwump, thwump. My blood ran cold. I knew that sound. It wasn't a news chopper or a rescue flight. It was the heavy, aggressive beat of a military-grade transport helicopter. The wind outside picked up, whipping the trees into a frenzy as the noise became deafening, hovering directly over my roof. On the sofa, Ryan's eyes snapped open. The fever haze was gone instantly, incinerated by a flash of pure black rage. He didn't look like a sick man anymore. He looked like a nuclear weapon that had just been armed. They found us," he growled, the sound low and lethal, vibrating deep in his chest. He sat up, the cooling cloth falling unheeded to the floor, and the look on his face told me that the domestic interlude was over. War had just landed on my front lawn. Chapter 6. The Breach. The front door didn't open. It exploded inward. Wood splinters rained across the entryway as heavy boots kicked the lock mechanism into oblivion. I screamed, scrambling backward until my back hit the stone fireplace, grabbing a heavy iron poker because the bat was out of reach. Through the swirling dust and the roar of the helicopter rotors overhead, 4 figures in tactical black gear stormed into my living room. They moved with the terrifying precision of Delta-ranked enforcers, elite, lethal, and absolutely without mercy. They had assault rifles raised, on lasers sweeping the room until 4 red dots settled on my chest. "Secure the target," one of them barked, his voice distorted by a mask. "Neutralize the rogue." "No," I shouted, raising the poker, though I knew it was useless against shifter speed and bullets. I wasn't a warrior. I was a gardener, a baker, a recluse. I was about to die in my pajamas because I had nursed a stray. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the impact, for the pain. But it never came. A roar shook the foundations of the cabin, a sound so primal, so full of ancient commanding power that it dropped the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. Rian moved. He didn't stagger or stumble, he blurred. 1 second he was on the sofa, and the next he was standing in front of me, a wall of furious muscle between me and the guns. He wasn't wearing a shirt. His scars were on full display, and he looked like a nightmare made flesh. He didn't shift into his wolf form. He didn't need to. The sheer aura of his alpha authority hit the room like a physical shockwave. "Kneel!" The command wasn't spoken, it was detonated. It slammed into the soldiers, overriding their training, their muscles, their very will to stand. All 4 deltas collapsed simultaneously, their knees hitting the floor with bone-jarring force, their weapons clattering from their hands as their heads were forced down by the crushing weight of the king's voice. Even I felt it, a compelling urge to drop, to submit, to bare my throat, but Rian's hand shot back, gripping my hip, tethering me to him, keeping me upright. "You dare!" Rian snarled, stepping forward, the floorboards groaning under his bare feet. "Aye, you dare kick down the door of my sanctuary! You dare point weapons at her!" He stopped in front of the lead soldier, who was trembling, sweat pouring down his face as he fought the compulsion. Rian grabbed the man by his tactical vest and hauled him up effortlessly, bringing him face to face with the monster he had unleashed. "Hi, King," the soldier choked out. "We were retrieving rescue protocol." "Does this look like a rescue?" Rian roared, tossing the man aside like a ragdoll. He turned to the others, his chest heaving, his eyes burning with a violet-tinged gold that signaled his wolf was right at the surface, ready to slaughter. "She is not a rogue, she is not a target." He reached back and grabbed my hand, pulling me out from behind him, forcing me to stand beside him in the center of the chaos. His grip was bruising, possessive, undeniable. He looked at the soldiers, then at me, and his voice dropped to a lethal whisper that was far scarier than the shouting. "Touch her," he hissed, his gaze sweeping over the cowering elite squad. "And I will end your bloodlines. I will erase your names from the history books. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Majesty," the soldiers chorused, voices shaking. Rian didn't relax. He didn't stop glowing. He turned to me, and for a split second, I saw the apology in his eyes, the regret that our bubble had popped. But then the king mask slammed back into place. He wasn't Rian anymore. He was the monarch, and I was now part of his court, whether I wanted to be or not. He extended his hand toward the ruined door, toward the waiting helicopter, and the life I had run away from. "Pack your bag, Maya," he ordered, though his thumb stroked the back of my hand in a silent plea. "We're going home, and home is not this cabin anymore." Chapter 7. The Gilded Cage. The helicopter ride was a suffocating blur of noise and tension, a metal beast tearing through the sky that carried me further and further away from the only life I knew. I sat strapped into a leather bucket seat that cost more than my car, staring out the window as the sprawling forests of the territory gave way to the manicured, fortress-like grounds of the royal estate. Rian sat across from me, his knees brushing mine in the cramped space. But he felt miles away. He was no longer the vulnerable, concussed man on my sofa. He was the king again, headset on, barking silent orders into a microphone, his face a mask of cold efficiency. Yet, every few minutes, his hand would drift across the gap to squeeze my knee. A silent, grounding touch that told me he hadn't forgotten I was there, even if he was currently commanding an army. When we finally landed on the private pad, the sheer scale of his world hit me like a physical blow. Stone walls that stretched for acres, guards patrolling with military precision, and a main house that looked less like a home and more like a monument to power. We were swarmed the moment the rotors spun down. Staff, advisors, and security personnel descended like a flock of anxious birds, ushering us toward the massive double doors. I felt small, underdressed in my jeans and muddy boots, clutching my single duffel bag like a shield. Rian was instantly swallowed by a group of men in suits, and before I could reach for him, a stern-faced woman with a clipboard stepped into my path. She introduced herself as the head of household and informed me, with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes, that I would be escorted to the guest wing in the East Tower. The guest wing. The words landed heavy in my stomach. Of course, I wasn't his mate. I was a curiosity, a loose end he had picked up in a storm. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat, and allowed myself to be led away, casting one last look at Rian's retreating back. The suite was beautiful, cold, and utterly impersonal. It was filled with white lilies and furniture that looked too expensive to sit on. I spent hours pacing the floor, waiting for a summons that never came, feeling the silence of the room pressing in on me. By the time night fell, I was exhausted and angry, mostly at myself for expecting anything different. I showered in a bathroom the size of my old kitchen and crawled into the massive bed, locking the heavy oak door behind me. I needed a barrier. I needed to pretend, just for tonight, that I wasn't trapped in a gilded cage with a man who could crush nations. I turned off the lamp, pulling the silk duvet up to my chin, and squeezed my eyes shut. I had been asleep for maybe 20 minutes when a sound like a thunderclap shattered the quiet. Wood splintered, metal shrieked, and the heavy oak door to my bedroom was ripped violently from its hinges. I bolted upright, heart hammering, screaming as the door crashed to the floor in a cloud of dust. Rian stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the hall light, his chest heaving and his eyes glowing a furious radioactive gold. He looked wild. His tie undone, his suit jacket gone, his sleeves rolled up to reveal the tension in his forearms. He scanned the room, his gaze landing on me, and the feral panic in his expression instantly morphed into something darker, more possessive. "Why is this door locked?" he demanded, his voice a low growl that vibrated in the floorboards. He stepped over the ruin of the doorframe, kicking a piece of wood aside as he stalked toward the bed. "I couldn't feel you. I reached for the bond, and there was a wall." He stopped at the edge of the mattress, looking down at me with an intensity that made the air crackle. "I thought you left. I thought you ran." I stared at him, clutching the sheet, my fear dissolving into disbelief. "I didn't run, Ryan. I went to bed. The staff put me here. And they said this was the guest wing." "Guest?" The word came out like a curse. Rian turned, grabbing the bedside phone and ripping the cord out of the wall before throwing it across the room. "You are not a guest. You are mine." He climbed onto the bed, ignoring my squeak of protest, crawling over the duvet until he was looming over me, boxing me in with his arms. "No more walls," he breathed, his forehead resting against mine, his scent of rain and power overwhelming the sterile smell of the room. "No more locked doors. If I wake up and cannot reach you, I will tear this entire house down, brick by brick, until I find you. Do you understand?" Chapter 8. Scent of Another. The next morning, the reality of my new life set in with the arrival of a medical team. Rian had left before dawn for a war council meeting. Apparently, and disappearing for 2 days caused geopolitical issues. But he had left strict orders that I was to be assessed. I expected an interrogation, but instead I got Dr. Elias. Elias was a beta, a soft-spoken man with kind eyes and a scent like old paper and chamomile. He checked my vitals, asked about my history, and treated me with a gentle respect that I wasn't used to. For the first time since arriving at the estate, I relaxed. We talked about books, about the garden outside the window, and for an hour I forgot that I was the controversial houseguest of a king. I laughed at a joke he made about the stiffness of the royal guard, and he smiled, patting my shoulder in a friendly platonic gesture as he packed up his bag. "You're healthy as a horse, Maya," Elias said, snapping his bag shut, "though your cortisol levels are high. I try to stay out of the king's way when he's in a mood. He's been intense lately." I was about to reply that intense was the understatement of the century when the temperature in the room plummeted. The air grew heavy, thick with static, and the hairs on my arms stood up. I didn't need to look at the door to know who was there. The predator had returned to the den. Rian stood in the open doorway, because there was no door anymore, and he looked like a nightmare. He was still in his suit from the meeting, but he looked disheveled, his eyes black with dilated pupils. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Elias. And he was growling. It was a low subsonic sound that rattled the windows in their frames. His nostrils flared, inhaling sharply, and his face twisted into a snarl of pure, unadulterated jealousy. "You smell like him," Rian said, his voice flat and terrifyingly calm. He took a step into the room, and Elias immediately dropped to his knees, head bowed, exposing his neck. It was a survival instinct, pure and simple. "Your Majesty," Elias stammered, "I was just conducting the physical—" "You touched her," Rian interrupted, continuing his slow, stalking approach. "I smell your hands on her shoulder. I smell your laughter on her breath." He stopped inches from the trembling doctor, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "Get out, before I forget that you are a loyal servant, and only remember that you are a male in my mate's territory." Elias didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled backward and fled the room, leaving me alone with a king who looked ready to burn the world down because another man had told a joke. "Rian, stop it," I snapped, sliding off the high bed to stand between him and the door. "He's a doctor. He was being nice. You can't just terrorize people for doing their jobs." Rian turned his gaze to me, and the anguish in his expression stopped me cold. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked wrecked. He walked toward me, not with the swagger of a king, but with the desperation of a starving man. He grabbed me, pulling me hard against his chest, burying his face in the crook of my neck, where Elias had patted my shoulder. He scrubbed his cheek against the skin, inhaling deeply, then licking the spot as if to wash away the scent. "I can't help it," he groaned against my skin, his hands gripping my waist so tight it bruised. "The beast. It hates it. It hates anything that isn't me touching you. It wants to kill them, Maya. Ugh, it wants to tear them apart." He pulled back, his gold eyes shimmering with unshed tears of frustration. He knew he was being irrational, and he hated himself for it, which only made it more tragic. He wasn't a tyrant enjoying the power. He was a man losing control of his instincts. Suddenly, he dropped. The Alpha King, the ruler of millions, fell to his knees on the plush carpet in front of me. He took my hand and placed it on his throat, right over his pulse, his eyes looking up at me with total submission. "Punish me," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I frightened you. I threatened a healer. I am a monster. Punishing me is your right, Maya. Hurt me, ground me. Do something to show me that you are the one holding the leash, because I am slipping." Chapter 9. The Omega's Worth. I didn't punish him. I just held him until the trembling stopped. But the incident with Elias made one thing painfully clear. I was out of my depth. I wasn't a queen. I wasn't even a high-ranking wolf. I was just Maya, and I was drowning. The next afternoon, seeking escape, I found the Royal Library. It was a cavernous, two-story room filled with ancient texts, a place of silence where I hoped to hide. But as I curled up in a window seat hidden by heavy velvet curtains, the heavy oak doors opened and voices drifted in. It was the Council of Elders. I froze, holding my breath, as the most powerful wolves in the kingdom discussed the one topic I wanted to avoid. Me. "She is a nobody," a harsh, gravelly voice sneered. "A rogue Omega with no lineage, no connections, and no power. The king needs a mate who brings strength to the alliance. I'm not a charity case he picked up in the woods." "She is weak," another voice agreed, dripping with disdain. "Have you seen her? She flinches at shadows. She will break under the pressure of the crown within a month. And when she breaks, she will take Rian down with her. We need to remove her. For the good of the pack." I sat there, tears stinging my eyes, my hand pressed over my mouth to stifle a sob. They were right. I knew they were right. I was weak. I was just a girl with a bat and a garden. I didn't belong here. I slid off the window seat, intending to sneak out the back servants' entrance and keep running until I hit the coast. But as I turned, I ran straight into a wall of solid muscle. Rian was there. He hadn't been in the meeting. He had been looking for me. He looked down at my tear-streaked face, then at the group of elders who had frozen at his sudden appearance. His face went terrifyingly blank. He didn't yell. He didn't attack. He simply took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine, and pulled me toward the door. "Come with me," he said, his voice deceptively soft. He led me not to our room, but out of the palace entirely, marching me across the manicured lawns to the royal training grounds. The grounds were packed. Hundreds of elite soldiers were sparring, the air filled with the sounds of combat and grunts of effort. When the king arrived, silence rippled through the arena like a wave. Everyone stopped. Everyone bowed. Rian walked me to the center of the ring, the red sand crunching under our boots. He turned to me, ignoring the army watching us, and cupped my face in his hands. "You heard them," he said, not a question. You think you are weak because you cannot crush a skull with your bare hands. You think value is measured in violence." He shook his head, his thumbs brushing away my tears. "Maya, look at me." I looked up, sniffing. His eyes were swirling with that chaotic, noisy gold. The roar he had told me about. The pressure of the voices. "My mind is a hurricane," he confessed, loud enough for the front rows to hear. "I am strong enough to break the world, but I am not strong enough to be quiet. I am drowning in noise every second of every day." He stepped closer, pressing his forehead to mine. "But when you are here, silence, peace. You are the only thing in the universe that can quiet the storm. That is not weakness, Maya. That is the greatest power in this kingdom. You hold the king's sanity in your hands." He pulled back, his gaze fierce and proud. "Let them see," he growled. And then, in front of the council who had called me a nobody, in front of the army that served him, Rian kissed me. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a claiming, a searing brand of possession that told every wolf watching exactly who I was. He kissed me until my knees buckled, and he had to hold me up, his arm like an iron band around my waist. When he finally lifted his head, he glared at the stunned audience, his voice booming across the arena. "This is your queen. Anyone who questions her worth questions my sanity, and I am feeling very unstable today." Chapter 10. The Phantom Pain. If there is anything more pathetic than a grown woman clinging to a man's bicep like a barnacle, I haven't found it yet, but I honestly didn't care. Rian was leaving, and it was only for 24 hours, a mandatory diplomatic summit with the Northern Territories that apparently couldn't be resolved via email. But the way we were acting, you would think he was being deployed to Mars for a decade. He was currently sitting on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands, looking utterly miserable while I tried to pack his overnight bag. Every time I put a shirt in, he would take it out, fold it meticulously, and then sigh like a dying whale. It was ridiculous. It was codependent. And it was the sweetest thing I had ever experienced. "You have to go," I said softly, smoothing the hair at the nape of his neck. "If you don't go, they'll think you're unstable. And we need them to sign the trade agreement so we can get those imported chocolates you like." Rian groaned, leaning back until his head hit my stomach, wrapping his arms around my waist. He buried his face in my sweater, inhaling deeply. "I don't care about chocolate," he mumbled, his voice muffled. "I care that when I leave this room, the noise starts again, the voices, the demands. It's going to be so loud, Maya. I don't want to hear them. I just want to hear you." We spent the rest of the night awake, tangling together under the heavy duvet, whispering in the dark. It wasn't about sex, it was about storage. We were storing up touch, scent, and sound to last us through the separation. He told me stories I knew he hadn't shared with anyone else. About his first shift. About the terror of taking the throne at 18. About how cold the crown felt physically on his head. I listened, tracing the silver scars on his chest, realizing with a sudden, terrifying clarity that I wasn't just infatuated with his power or his protection. I was falling in love with the lonely, exhausted man beneath the title. I loved Rian, the guy who broke coffee mugs and hated noise, not the Alpha King who commanded armies. Morning came like a thief. The sun had barely crested the horizon when the entourage arrived to collect him. The goodbye was brief, professional, and agonizing. Rian kissed me at the door, a hard, desperate press of lips that tasted of coffee and regret. And then he was gone, swept into a black armored SUV that sped away down the long driveway. I stood on the porch, waving until the taillights disappeared around the bend. And then it hit me. It wasn't a gradual ache. It was a physical severance. The moment he crossed the invisible boundary of the estate wards, the bond between us pulled taut and snapped. My knees buckled. I collapsed onto the cold stone of the porch, gasping for air as a wave of icy emptiness crashed over me. It felt like someone had reached into my chest and unplugged my heart. The silence of the house, which had been peaceful with him, suddenly turned predatory. Without his presence anchoring me, the world felt too big, too sharp, and terrifyingly lonely. I curled into a ball on the welcome mat, shivering in the morning sun, realizing too late that I hadn't just let him leave. I had let him take my equilibrium with him. Chapter 11. The Sabotage. By noon, I had managed to drag myself upright and retreat to the library, trying to drown the hollow ache in my chest with books. The house staff gave me a wide berth, likely sensing the storm cloud of misery hanging over my head. But I was staring blankly at a page I hadn't turned in 20 minutes when the heavy doors creaked open. I expected Elias or a maid, but instead a woman glided in. She was stunning, tall, statuesque, with hair like spun silk and eyes that held the cold, calculating glitter of a viper. I recognized her from the gossip magazines. Lady Corinne, a high-ranking alpha female from the southern packs, and Ryan's rumored preferred match before I stumbled out of the woods. "So," she purred, walking toward me with a predator's grace, her heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor. "This is the little stray that has the king so distracted." She stopped at my table, looking down her nose at me with a pitying smile that made my skin crawl. "You're smaller than I expected, and quite plain. I suppose Rian is going through another one of his charitable phases." I stiffened, closing my book. "Excuse me." Corinne laughed, a tinkling, cruel sound. "Oh, honey, don't look so shocked. Rian is a powerful male with powerful appetites. He gets bored easily. He picks up strays, broken things, rogues, omegas, and plays house for a few weeks until the novelty wears off. Then he sends them away with a nice settlement and returns to the real world." She leaned in, her perfume cloying and sharp. "Did he tell you you were special? That you were the only one?" "He says that to all of them. It's part of the game. Enjoy the silk sheets while you can, darling. The rotation usually changes by the full moon." Her words were poison, and they found the cracks in my armor instantly. My deepest fear, that I was a nobody, a mistake, a temporary amusement, roared to life. Why would the king want me? I was nothing. He was just concussed and lonely. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly, and fled the library without a word, Corinne's laughter chasing me down the hall. Panic, blind and irrational, seized me. I couldn't stay here and wait for him to come back and tell me it was over. I had to leave. I had to go back to my cabin, to my small life, before this shattered me completely. I threw my things into my duffel bag with shaking hands, not bothering to fold them. I ran down the back stairs, slipping out through the kitchen, and sprinted toward the main gates. My chest heaved, tears blurring my vision as I reached the massive iron barrier. I reached for the keypad to punch in the exit code Elias had given me. The keypad went dead. The red light blinked out. A heavy, mechanical thud echoed around the perimeter as the emergency bolts slammed home, sealing the estate. "Leaving so soon?" The voice didn't come from behind me. It came from the PA system speakers mounted on the walls, booming across the grounds like the voice of a furious god. It was Rian. He wasn't at the summit. Or if he was watching. "Turn around, Maya," the king commanded, his voice vibrating with a terrifyingly calm rage. "Drop the bag. Go back to the house. or I will burn this entire forest down to find you, and I promise you, I am not in the mood to be gentle. Chapter 12. The Chase. I dropped the bag. I didn't have a choice. The sheer authority in his voice had frozen my limbs, and my wolf was currently cowering in the back of my mind, whining in submission. I turned slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The estate was silent, waiting. The air pressure had dropped, heavy with the static charge of an approaching storm. He was here. He hadn't just been watching on a camera. He had come back early. A shadow detached itself from the tree line at the edge of the driveway. Rian stepped into the light, but he didn't look like the man who had left this morning. His suit jacket was gone. His tie was hanging loose around his neck, and his eyes were glowing so bright they looked like headlights in the dusk. He didn't walk toward me. He stalked. It was a slow, deliberate movement, the prowl of a predator who knows the prey has nowhere left to run. "Run," he whispered, though he was 50 yards away. The wind carried the single syllable to me, and my instincts screamed. I turned and bolted. It was irrational. I couldn't outrun an alpha, but the adrenaline demanded motion. I sprinted toward the gardens, dodging through the maze of hedges, breathless and terrified and exhilaratingly alive. I could hear him behind me, heavy footsteps thudding on the grass, gaining on me with terrifying speed. He wasn't rushing, he was herding me. He let me reach the center of the rose garden, near the fountain, before he struck. Strong arms wrapped around my waist, tackling me not to the ground, but up against the rough bark of an ancient oak tree. I gasped as my back hit the wood, and then Rian was everywhere. His body pressing me into the tree, his hands pinning my wrists above my head, his face buried in my neck. He was growling, a low, continuous rumble that vibrated through my entire body. "You listen to her," he snarled against my skin, biting lightly at the sensitive cord of my neck. "You listen to the snake instead of your mate. You tried to leave me." She said there were others," I sobbed, the fear finally breaking. "She said I was just a rotation, a stray." Rian pulled back, his face inches from mine. He looked furious, but not at me. "Smell me," he ordered, releasing one of my wrists to tear open the collar of his shirt, exposing the scent gland at the base of his throat. "Do it, now." I leaned forward, inhaling shakily. I smelled rain. I smelled pine. I smelled the deep, spicy musk that was purely him, and underneath it all, nothing. No other perfume, no other omega. Just the lingering trace of my vanilla scent that clung to his skin from this morning. "Do you smell anyone else?" he demanded, his voice raw. "Do you smell a rotation? A harem?" "No. Because there has never been anyone else. My scent is clear, Maya. It has been clear for 10 years waiting for you. I am untouched." The truth of it, the biological, undeniable proof, slammed into me. He had been celibate, waiting. For me. "I'm sorry," I whispered, tears spilling over. "I was scared." Ryan's expression crumbled. The rage vanished, replaced by a desperate need. He scooped me up into his arms, carrying me bridal style, as if I weighed nothing. "We are done talking," he rasped, striding toward the house with a purpose that made my toes curl. "We are going to the bedroom. I am going to lock the door. And tomorrow morning, you are going to wear my mark so deep that no one will ever doubt who you belong to again." Chapter 13. The mark. Waking up with a mating mark is not like getting a tattoo, and it is like waking up to find that your soul has been rewired overnight. The skin at the junction of my neck and shoulder throbbed with a dull rhythmic heat that synced perfectly with the heartbeat of the man currently acting as my mattress. Rian was sprawled beneath me, his massive arms wrapped around my waist like steel bands, his nose buried in my hair. Every time he inhaled, I felt a phantom shiver race down my spine, a strange invisible tug that told me exactly how he was feeling. And right now, the Alpha King was feeling indescribably, insufferably smug. The chaotic noise of his mind that he had complained about, the constant roar of the pack, was gone, replaced by a hum of contentment that felt like warm honey. I tried to shift, to slide out of the tangled nest of sheets and limbs, but his grip tightened instantly, pulling me back down until my face was pressed against the solid wall of his chest. "Don't move," he rumbled, the sound vibrating through my ribcage. "It's too early, the sun isn't even up. If you get out of bed, I'll have to assume you're trying to escape again, and then I'll have to chase you. And frankly, I'm too happy to run." I looked up to see him watching me, his golden eyes heavy with sleep but bright with possession. He traced the fresh, sensitive mark on my neck with his thumb, a possessive smirk playing on his lips. "Mine," he whispered, the word no longer a desperate plea, but a settled fact. "You have no idea how long I've waited to see that on you. It looks better than the crown ever did." I flushed, instinctively bringing a hand up to cover the bite, but he gently pulled my fingers away. "Don't hide it. I want the world to see. I want every wolf in this hemisphere to know exactly who you belong to, so they don't make the mistake of looking at you twice." Breakfast was an exercise in absurdity. Rian refused to let me walk to the kitchen. He carried me, depositing me on a stool while he burned toast and made eggs that were technically edible if you squinted. The change in the household dynamic was instant and jarring. The staff, who had previously looked at me with polite curiosity or veiled disdain, now averted their eyes and bowed their heads when I passed. I wasn't the guest anymore. I was the mate. I carried the king's scent woven so deeply into my own that it was practically a neon sign. It was overwhelming, this sudden elevation to royalty, but Rian made it bearable. He sat beside me, stealing pieces of my burnt toast. His knee pressed constantly against mine, grounding me whenever the panic started to rise. He was giddy, light-hearted in a way I hadn't thought possible for a man who carried the weight of a nation. Then the bubble burst. A silver platter arrived not with pastries, but with a heavy, wax-sealed envelope. Ryan's smile vanished the moment he saw the crest. The temperature in the kitchen dropped 20 degrees as he snatched the letter, tearing it open with a growl that made the china rattle. He scanned the contents, his jaw clenching so hard, a muscle feathered in his cheek. "The council!" he spat, tossing the heavy paper onto the table as if it were contaminated. "They want to verify the bond. They are invoking the right of suitability. They want to test you, Maya. But they want to see if a commoner can withstand the pressure of the throne." I reached for the letter, my hand trembling slightly. "What does that mean? A test? Like a written exam?" Ryan stood up, pacing the length of the kitchen like a caged tiger, his hands curling into fists. "No. It means they want to interrogate you. They want to pick you apart, find your insecurities, and prove that you are too weak to be queen. They want me to marry Corinne. They think they can scare you off." He stopped in front of me, placing his hands on the counter on either side of my hips, trapping me. His eyes were fierce, burning with a protective rage. "You don't have to go. I can tell them to rot. I can dissolve the council before lunch." "And cause a civil war?" I asked quietly, reaching out to smooth the furrow between his brows. "Ryan, if I don't go, they'll never accept me. They'll always see me as the usurper who stole their king. I have to do this." He leaned into my touch, closing his eyes, looking torn between his instinct to lock me in a tower and his respect for my choice. "They will try to break you," he warned, his voice rough. "They will use words like knives." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Let them try. I hit an alpha king with a baseball bat and lived to tell the tale. I think I can handle a few grumpy old men in robes. Ryan let out a dark, sharp laugh, pressing a fierce kiss to my forehead. "That's my girl. Let them try indeed." Chapter 14. The Lion's Den. The council chamber was designed to intimidate. It was a circular room built of black stone, lit only by high narrow windows that cast long judgment-filled shadows across the floor. And in the center stood a single wooden chair, isolated and exposed. 12 elders sat on a raised dais in a semicircle, looking down like vultures waiting for a carcass. I walked in alone. Rian had been barred from the proceedings by ancient law, though I could feel his rage simmering through our bond like a distant thunderstorm, and took my seat. The silence was heavy, thick with the scent of dust and disapproval. I smoothed my skirt, keeping my chin high, refusing to let them see the way my hands were shaking in my lap. I wasn't a warrior. I wasn't a politician. I was just Maya, and that had to be enough. "So," the head elder began, a wizened wolf with eyes like flint, "this is the creature that has bewitched our king." He didn't speak to me. He spoke about me as if I were a piece of furniture. "Tell us, girl. What do you bring to the pack? Do you have wealth? Do you command armies? Is your bloodline pure enough to strengthen the royal strain? Or are you simply a distraction, a bed warmer he will tire of when winter comes?" The cruelty of the question was intended to shatter me, to make me cry and run, proving their point. A week ago, it might have worked, but I had spent a week with Rian. I knew the man behind the crown. I knew his nightmares, his exhaustion, his desperate need for silence. I stood up. The movement startled them. Evidently, the accused was supposed to cower. "I do not bring wealth," I said, my voice shaking at first before finding a steady rhythm. "And I have never commanded an army, but I know something you do not." I looked each of them in the eye, channeling every ounce of the stubbornness that had kept me alive in my drafty cabin. "You think the king needs a warrior. You think he needs more noise, more power, more aggression. But Rian is drowning in noise. He carries the weight of every soul in this room, and it is crushing him." The room went dead silent. "He doesn't need a partner who can win a war. He can win wars by himself. He needs a place to rest. He needs an anchor. I am not his distraction, Elder. I am his sanity. And if you think that has no value, then you do not know your king at all." A murmur rippled through the dais. Some of the younger elders looked uncomfortable, perhaps recognizing the truth in my words. But the head elder's expression didn't soften. It sharpened. He leaned forward, steepling his bony fingers. "A pretty speech," he sneered. "But we deal in blood. I not sentiment. You claim to be a nobody, Maya, a rogue, but that is not entirely true, is it?" He pulled a crumbling yellowed scroll from his robes and tossed it onto the table before me. "We dug into your past. Your mother wasn't just a rogue. She was the last scion of the Silverleaf line. Healers. Rare, powerful, and incredibly valuable to the royal bloodline. The world tilted on its axis. I stared at the scroll, my breath catching in my throat. I knew nothing about my father, and my mother had died when I was small. I had always been told we were nobodies. That's impossible," I whispered. "I'm just a gardener." The head elder smiled, a cold, triumphant twisting of lips. "Is it? Or did the king know? Did he track you, not because of some fated romance, but because he needed a breeder from a powerful line to secure his legacy? Did he tell you that you were his mate, or did he simply secure an asset?" The doubt hit me like a physical blow to the gut. The tracking, the obsession, the way he had hunted me down. "I've been looking for you for 10 years, he had said. 10 years. Long enough to do research. Long enough to hunt a bloodline." The warmth of the bond suddenly felt cold, tainted by suspicion. Had the affection, the tenderness, the domesticity just been a way to secure the asset? I felt sick. I turned and walked out of the chamber, ignoring their calls, my mind reeling with the horrific possibility that the only man I had ever loved was just a very efficient king securing his bloodline. Chapter 15. The Doubt. I found Rian in the throne room, pacing. He looked up the moment I entered. his face lighting up with that devastating boyish hope that usually made my heart melt. "I felt you," he said, rushing toward me, his hands reaching out. "You were brilliant." I could feel the spike of confidence. "Did they kneel? Did you tell them to—" He stopped, his hands hovering inches from my arms as he saw my face. The light in his eyes died instantly, replaced by a dawn of panic. "Maya, what is it? What did they say?" "Did you know?" I asked, my voice hollow, stepping back to avoid his touch. I couldn't bear to have him touch me right now. If I felt the bond, I might believe him. And I needed the truth, not the chemicals. "Did you know about my mother? About the Silverleaf line?" Rian froze. The color drained from his face, leaving him ashen. He didn't deny it. He didn't look confused. He looked guilty. "Maya, please," he started, his voice pleading. "It's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think," I shouted, the betrayal tearing out of my throat. "You said you tracked my scent. You said it was fate, but it was just biology, wasn't it? You needed a healer. You needed a breeder for the next generation of super soldiers." Tears streamed down my face, hot and angry. "Was any of it real, Rian? The cabin? The toast? The way you looked at me? Or was I just a project you needed to acquire?" "Stop it!" Rian roared, the sound so loud it shook the chandeliers. He spun around and punched the stone pillar beside him, the impact pulverizing the rock and leaving a crater. He didn't seem to feel the pain. He turned back to me, his chest heaving, his eyes wild with desperation. "I didn't care about the bloodline. Yes, I knew who you were. I made it my business to know everyone in the kingdom. But I didn't come for the healer. I came for you." He ran a hand through his hair, pulling at the strands. "How can I prove it? How can I prove that I would love you if you were human, if you were nothing?" "You can't," I whispered, turning away. "Because you're the king. And kings don't make mistakes. They make calculations." Rian went still. "Calculations," he repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. He walked over to the massive gilded throne, the symbol of everything that stood between us, and reached into a hidden compartment in the armrest. He pulled out a folded, heavy piece of parchment and walked over to me, jamming it into my hand. "Read it," he commanded. "Read the date." I looked down at the paper. It was a formal document, stamped with the royal seal. An act of abdication. It detailed Rian's voluntary resignation from the throne, citing his inability to rule effectively without his fated mate. It transferred all power to the council. My eyes scanned to the bottom. The signature was his, bold and aggressive. And the date. The date was 2 weeks ago, 3 days before he crashed into my cabin. "I signed that before I found you," Rian said, his voice breaking. "I was done, Maya. I was going to walk away. I couldn't handle the noise anymore. I was going to abdicate and go live in a cabin in the woods and die alone." He stepped closer, tears standing in his own eyes. "I didn't come to you to secure my crown. I came to you because you were the only reason I didn't sign the final order. I chose you over the kingdom before I even knew your name. So don't you dare tell me this is a calculation. You are not my asset. You are my salvation." Chapter 16. The King Kneels. The paper in my hand felt heavier than a weapon. I stared at the signature, bold, aggressive, unmistakable, and the date scrawled next to it. 2 weeks ago, a time when I was just a woman drinking tea in a lonely cabin, and he was a king sitting on a throne of skulls, deciding that the weight was finally too much to bear. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, knocking the wind from my lungs and the doubt from my heart. He hadn't hunted me to secure his legacy. He had been ready to burn his legacy to the ground just to make the noise stop. I wasn't his battery charger, his political prop, or his broodmare. I was the lifeline he had grabbed onto when he was already drowning. I looked up, but the throne room was empty. Rian had vanished. in leaving me alone with the truth and a piece of parchment that proved I was the biggest idiot in the Northern Hemisphere. I found him in the gardens. It was pouring rain, a deluge that turned the manicured lawns into a swamp, mirroring the storm that had brought him crashing into my living room that first night. He was standing by the stone fountain, soaked to the bone, his expensive suit clinging to his frame like a second skin. He wasn't looking for cover. He was just standing there, face turned up to the gray sky, eyes closed, letting the water wash over him as if he were trying to dissolve. He looked devastatingly lonely, a titan brought low by the simple human fear of rejection. My heart shattered and reformed in that instant, beating a new rhythm that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with absolute, unshakable certainty. I didn't care about the council. I didn't care about the bloodlines or the politics. I just cared about the man standing in the mud. I didn't call his name. I walked out into the storm, my heels sinking into the soft earth, the rain plastering my hair to my face instantly. I marched right up to him, stopping only when I was close enough to see the droplets caught in his eyelashes. Rian opened his eyes. The gold was dull, fractured, looking at me with a resignation that terrified me. He thought I was coming to say goodbye. He thought I was coming to return the letter and leave him to his silence. He didn't speak. He just waited for the executioner's axe to fall. I held up the abdication letter, the ink already beginning to run in the rain. "You were going to quit," I shouted over the sound of the downpour. "You were going to walk away from everything. The power, the money, the control." Rian flinched, a muscle jumping in his jaw. "I was tired, Maya. I am tired. Without you, the crown is just a golden hat that gives me a migraine. If you leave, I sign that paper. I mean it." He looked at me with such raw, bleeding honesty that it stole the breath from my lungs. "I will not be king in a world where you don't love me." I didn't answer with words. I took the thick, creamy parchment, the document that could topple a government, and tore it in half. The sound was sharp, satisfying, a rip that echoed between us. Ryan's eyes went wide. I tore it again and again until the king's resignation was nothing but wet confetti in my hands. I threw the pieces into the fountain, watching them swirl away in the dark water. "You don't get to quit," I said, stepping closer until my chest bumped his. "And you don't get to do this alone anymore. I don't want a resigned king, Rian. I want you. And if you come with a country, then I guess I'll have to help you run it." Ryan stared at me, the rain dripping from his nose, his expression shifting from shock to a dawn of hope so bright it was blinding. And then, the Alpha King, the most feared predator on the continent, did the unthinkable. He dropped to his knees in the mud. He didn't care about the suit. He didn't care about the windows of the palace overlooking the garden. He wrapped his arms around my waist and pressed his face into my stomach, holding me with a desperation that shook his entire frame. It wasn't a gesture of weakness. It was an act of worship. "Maya," he choked out, his voice muffled against my soaked blouse. "My queen." "I'm my silence. I will give you the world. I will give you anything." I wove my fingers into his wet hair, looking down at the powerful creature kneeling at my feet, and felt a surge of fierce protectiveness. "I don't need the world, Rian," I whispered, tugging gently to make him look at me. "I just need you to get up off the ground and kiss me before we both catch pneumonia." He stood, rising like a tide, and the look in his eyes was no longer resigned. It was ravenous. He scooped me up into his arms, lifting me effortlessly until I was eye level, his hands gripping my hips as if he intended to leave bruises. "Are you sure?" he growled, the gold in his eyes flaring to life, burning away the gray of the storm. "Because once I take you back inside, there is no running. I will never let you go. Not for the council, not for peace. Not for anything." I wrapped my legs around his waist, pulling him close until our lips were a breath apart. "I'm done running, Your Majesty," I whispered against his mouth. Take me home. Chapter 17. The Coronation of the Heart. 6 months ago, the royal estate had felt like a fortress, built to keep the world out. A cold expanse of stone and silence, where laughter went to die. Now, walking down the East Wing corridor, I had to duck slightly to avoid the trailing ivy of a massive pothos plant that had decided to conquer the ceiling. The place didn't look like a bunker anymore. It looked like a greenhouse that had been invaded by a very expensive hotel. Rian had complained, of course, grumbling about the jungle I was cultivating and how he couldn't walk 5 feet without tripping over a fern. But I noticed he never actually moved them. In fact, I had caught him more than once misting the orchids when he thought I wasn't looking, speaking to them with the same terrifyingly serious tone he used for diplomatic negotiations. It was the strangest, sweetest transformation. A king who could crush boulders with his bare hands, gently wiping dust off a fiddle leaf fig because his mate liked it. Tonight, however, the plants were just the backdrop for something far more chaotic. The annual Moonlight Gala was in full swing, which meant the ballroom was packed with every alpha, dignitary, and power-hungry socialite in the hemisphere. I stood on the balcony overlooking the sea of silken tuxedos, taking a moment to breathe. I was wearing a gown that cost more than my entire cabin. A shimmering, in deep blue thing that Rian had picked out because he said it reminded him of the storm that brought us together. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like an imposter. I wasn't the rogue hiding in the corner. I was the woman who had tamed the storm. I scanned the crowd and found him instantly. Rian was standing near the orchestra, currently looming over an unfortunate ambassador from the southern Pax. The poor man looked like he was vibrating with terror, sweating through his collar, as Rian listened with a face of absolute granite-hard boredom. The king looked devastating in his formal wear, the tailored black suit straining across his shoulders, his presence sucking the air out of the room. He was the monster they all feared, the ruthless tactician who had doubled the kingdom's territory in a decade. But then, he turned his head. His gaze cut through the crowd, ignoring the hundreds of people vying for his attention, and locked onto me. The transformation was visceral. The cold, predatory mask shattered instantly, replaced by a look of such raw, hungry devotion that I felt it like a physical caress across the room. He abandoned the ambassador mid-sentence, simply turned his back on a foreign dignitary, and started carving a path toward me. People parted like the Red Sea, bowing hastily, terrified of getting in his way. He didn't stop until he was standing in front of me, his hands settling on my waist, pulling me into his personal space with a possessiveness that made the nearby guests avert their eyes. "I hate them," he whispered against my ear, his voice a low vibrating growl that sent shivers racing down my spine. "All of them. They talk too much. They smell like anxiety and cheap perfume. My head is pounding." I smiled, smoothing the lapels of his jacket, feeling the tension radiating off him in waves. "You're doing great," I soothed, scratching lightly at the nape of his neck, right over the spot that I knew made his knees weak. "Just 1 more hour. Then we can kick everyone out and pretend the world doesn't exist." Rian leaned into my touch, his eyes fluttering shut for a brief second of bliss. 1 hour, he bargained, "and then I am taking you to the Fortress of Solitude. I ordered pizza, and I am not sharing." We didn't last the hour. 30 minutes later, we were sprinting down the hallway, like teenagers ditching prom, hand in hand, leaving a confused ballroom behind us. So we burst into our private quarters, the fortress, and the silence was instant and heavy, a balm to the soul. But the centerpiece of the room wasn't the fireplace or the view. It was the sofa. After that first night on my tiny lumpy couch, where his feet had dangled off the end, Rian had taken it upon himself to rectify the situation. He hadn't just bought a new couch. He had commissioned a behemoth. It was a custom-built, velvet-covered expanse the size of a small island, designed specifically so that a 7-foot alpha could sprawl out completely without touching the floor. Rian stripped off his jacket, tossing it carelessly onto a chair, and collapsed onto the cushions, dragging me down with him. We landed in a tangle of limbs and laughter, the stress of the gala dissolving instantly. He maneuvered us until he was lying on his back and I was curled on top of him, my head resting on his chest, his arms wrapped around me like a seatbelt. This was it. This was the moment he lived for. The quiet. The voices in his head, the roar of the pack, the demands of the crown, all of it faded into static when we were like this. Quiet, he murmured, his chest rising and falling in a slow, deep rhythm beneath my cheek. He buried his nose in my hair, inhaling that deep, grounding breath that never failed to make my heart stutter. Better than a throne, better than a kingdom. I traced the line of his jaw, looking up to see his golden eyes watching me with a softness that no one else would ever see. He wasn't the Alpha King right now. He was just Rian, the man who liked sunflowers and burnt toast and holding me while he slept. You know, I whispered, you still owe me a window. He chuckled, a deep rumbling sound that vibrated through my entire body. I gave you a palace, Maya. I think we're even. He tightened his grip, shifting so his lips brushed my forehead. Sleep now. No more running. No more storms. No more running, I agreed, closing my eyes and listening to the steady, powerful beat of his heart. He was the king of the world, the most dangerous creature to walk the earth. But in this room, on this sofa, he was just Rian. And I was the only one who held the leash. And just like that, the storm has finally passed. If Rian and Maya's journey from a broken window to a custom-built happily ever after made your heart flutter, please take a moment to hit that like button. It helps our pack grow and ensures these stories find the people who need them. Make sure you are subscribed with the bell turned on so you never miss the next mate call. I want to hear from you down in the comments. What was the moment that made you fall for the king? Was it the swing of the bat? The jealousy in the clinic? Or was it him kneeling in the rain? Let me know, and drop your city or country so I can see where our pack is howling from tonight. For those who aren't ready to leave this world just yet, hit the join button to become a member. You'll get early access to new series and exclusive extended cuts that we keep just for the inner circle. Thank you for letting me tell you their story. Sleep tight. And maybe leave a window unlocked tonight. You never know who might drop in.